Hello and welcome to this latest podcast from Harts Chartered Accountants. I'm delighted to have with me Dr. Adam Simon from Private GP Extra, she's a private GP practice. Welcome, good morning.
Morning.
And what actually made you want to become a doctor?
It's a very good question, actually, because I've no idea. From the earliest time I can remember, I wanted to be a doctor with no obvious reason. There was no particular big family history of being a doctor. I'm not sure. I think it's just I never had a second choice or second plan or plan B. It was always going to be medicine or nothing. And it's certainly definitely the right career choice for me.
And did you have a mentor that actually mentored you
No.
or inspired you to become?
No. It's another interesting thing about general practice is that it's actually quite isolated because you work as an autonomous individual. You might work in a practice, but you do all your work alone, and so you don't really have that mentoring role or that mentoring structure. I did have a trainer for a year. In my final year as a GP apprentice, you work with an established GP, but it wasn't really a mentoring role. It was just someone to help me get through my examinations.
Okay. And you have been a GP within the NHS, and you now run a private GP practice. What's the reason between switching from one to the other?
Gosh. Well, I was an NHS GP for about 18 years, and the NHS is an amazing institution. But within general practice, I feel there are some very deep-seated problems. As an NHS GP, you're constantly putting out fires. You never get to the crux of the problem, and you feel very rushed. You feel that time is constantly against you and that the workload is immense. And the problem in a situation like that is that if you're very pushed and very busy and very stressed, you impose your own agenda on the consultation. So it runs as you would want it to run, not necessarily as the patient would want it to run. So you end up being very doctor-centred and not really taking account of what the patient really needs. And over time that becomes more and more unsatisfactory. And so I started doing a few evening clinics at a local private hospital, as much as anything for mindfulness for me. The ability to actually just spend a bit more time with patients, and it was a revelation that this is what medicine was meant to be. I also found myself in a very sad situation that as a GP trainer myself with apprentice GPs under me, I was aware that as they were coming to the end of their apprenticeship, they were getting more and more stressed at how they would manage the stresses of normal GP life. And that made me very sad, and it made me realise there has to be a better way. And that's the reason why I effectively went into in private medicine.
So the private medicine, do you offer more than you offer through the NHS? Is there more services you can offer without being constrained by maybe what the NHS has to offer?
I think so, yes, there is. But the most important thing we offer probably is time. Our appointments are 30 minutes as a standard. And that means that we have the ability to listen to what the patient's saying.
And normally, say an appointment with the NHS, maybe 10 minutes
10
or
minutes,
so?
maximum 10 minutes, yeah. But we have the ability to also come to a shared decision making. So rather than me just saying, you must take these tablets or you must see this person, we have the ability to discuss it, look at the pros and cons of each different pathway, and then decide which is the best for that patient. And that's the crux of it, really.
I want to move on because obviously there's a lot to talk about, but a lot has happened over the last 2 years. We have had COVID, and obviously that's had a huge impact on mental health, and especially mental health in the workplace. Is this something you're seeing more of on a daily basis?
Definitely. I mean, there's been a massive explosion in mental health problems in the last 2 years. Some of it directly caused by COVID and the effects of having COVID, and some of it caused by isolation and working from home, which has put quite a big strain on a lot of people. The problem is that whilst the amount of mental health disease has increased, the provision of services to treat it hasn't. And it's getting harder and harder to get people to see psychologists, therapists, psychiatrists, and we're having to manage those people ourselves, which we can do, but it puts an increasing strain on GP services. And this is again where, as a private GP, I'm lucky that I have the time with a patient to actually spend listening to their problems and allowing them to explain the problems from their perspective and how it's affecting them. And that's been very helpful around mental health. I've been in the horrible situation this year of struggling to find specialist care for people with quite serious mental health problems, even suicidal thinking, which has never happened before. And that's just a function of the fact that the NHS mental health services are swamped and unable to manage the demand.
And what should firms be doing? Because obviously this will be going out to a lot of businesses as well. What should firms be doing to enhance the mental health provision? I know here at Harts we put on wellness sessions for our staff on a weekly basis for a number of months. Is it something that other firms should potentially be doing?
Definitely. I think awareness of mental health as a potential problem is very important. I think being aware of strains on individuals, if possible looking to redistribute some of their workload on a temporary basis just to take some of the pressure off them. I think giving them an opportunity to feel listened to and valued, not adopting the approach of you need to man up and just deal with this, suck it up. It doesn't work that way. And I think if a company can support its staff through mental health problems, you're going to have a very loyal staff member who will work for your company very hard and do the best they can for many years to come. So it's in their interest to do so.
Is there anything specific that firms can do?
Yeah, I think the wellness, the mindfulness that you described is very important. I think working in conjunction with therapists to allow fast-track appointments for staff members to go and see a therapist if they need to is also very important. Accessing that through the NHS could be 3-4 months down the line. So if you can get to see someone quickly, you can deal with the problem, maybe nip it in the bud, and then you'll have the person back at work as quickly as possible.
Great. Again, moving on to the NHS, there's a lot of talk about the NHS, both in politics and just generally with everything that's been going on. And the government is always putting money into the NHS. In your opinion, is it just a bottomless pit? The more money we put in, it's still going to need more and more and more?
It's a very difficult question. The models around the world of how a national healthcare system works are very different. I worked in New Zealand where they managed the budget by having a very limited formulary of medication, which kept the costs of medication down. But in this country, we have a slightly different problem. We have an ageing population, we have increasing health needs of the population, and we're not really putting the percentage of our GDP towards that we probably need to. We've been very lucky that we have a national health system which has a lot of support from people, but I think we've read this week in the national satisfaction levels have dipped to the lowest they've ever been. I think it's not a bottomless pit. It could be if you don't manage it properly, but I think some things need to work better. I think there needs to be better integration between primary and secondary care. A few years ago, local hospitals became foundation trusts, or they had the ability to become foundation trusts, and that made them profit-making organisations. And the problem there was, of course, if you're a profit-making organisation, you look to try and divest yourself of those things that don't make you any money. And that included a lot of follow-up and review of patients who still needed to see a consultant, but maybe didn't necessarily have any major problem. A lot of it was just to make sure that they were keeping on track. It might be some years after a cancer, it might be related to a heart condition, but just to make sure all was going well. It was an opportunity, should anything be amiss, that the consultant could manage that there and then. But it also meant that the patient had a contact point should their situation change. Well, that went, because from the Foundation Trust perspective, it was a loss maker. That put the burden of dealing with those sorts of patients onto NHS GPs who already had an increasing health needs of their own other population. And also COVID has meant that they have had less and less time to be able to devote themselves to their general patients and the patient's needs. So it's been a big problem. Better funding, hypothecated taxes potentially, but also looking at the way that we fund things. So rather than looking at a single financial year to complete a project, to actually look in the long term, maybe looking at a 5 or 10 year project to better meet the needs of the health needs of the population.
Is it hanging in there, the NHS?
Yeah, it is. It is because of the support from the staff and the patients. Will it hang in there for much longer? I don't know. When we've had private companies who've come into the NHS, they have often, understandably, wanted to cherry pick the most profitable parts of healthcare, leaving the less profitable parts for the NHS to carry on. That's not going to work. I think if you're going to work in tandem with a private company to support the NHS, you really need to ensure that they take on the whole burden of care, not just the most profitable parts.
Aren't they going to have to take on more anyway, because we see delays in and cancellations in treatments and operations and so on? Are they not going to have to kind of help clear the backlog?
Yes, they probably are, but I'm not sure that there is the structure in place to enable that to happen at the moment.
Moving on to being a GP, and we know we see a lot of GPs, there's not enough of them, lots of GPs are leaving the profession. Is it because it's just not sustainable being a GP anymore with all the demands on them? We're going to see more people doing what you've done and move into the private sector to be able to give what you feel is a far better service than the NHS? Or are we going to continue to have to try and recruit as many GPs as we can? Bit of a leading question.
Yeah, I think we do need more GPs. We have a very strange situation at the moment where when a GP qualifies, they are not tending to go into practice as a partner. They're tending to take on either a salaried role on a temporary basis or locum. And that means there's less consistency of GPs in an individual practice. I think there's also been a very interesting change, some positive and some negative in terms of the demographics of general practice. The positive is that we've got more female GPs, which is brilliant. I think that's very important. The negative side, and it's completely unrelated, is that GPs seem to have moved from working full-time, which was 4.5 days a week, to maybe 2 to 3 days a week. And that's reduced their availability to patients. And that's made some massive changes. So I think the combination of not recruiting enough GPs not wanting to work full-time, GPs wanting to do locums instead of partnerships, means that we have a big problem at the moment. And I think until that is sorted out properly, we're going to continue to struggle. The possible solutions are to insist that a GP works in a salaried role for 5 years after they qualify, to effectively pay back to the NHS the cost of their training, but also to increase the number of GPs and the training of GPs from the grassroots level is the most important things.
Bit more light-hearted. Do you watch all the medical programmes on TV?
Hate them. Absolutely hate them. My wife tells me that I sit there groaning at the way they're managing the patients, and she says, and I don't believe this, that I come up with a diagnosis well before they do, but I don't think that's true.
Quick fire round now.
Yeah, sure.
Fine dining or chippy tea?
Fine dining.
And Manchester United or Manchester City?
There's only one, United.
You after my own heart. Finally, a villa holiday or camping?
Camping.
Oh, marvellous. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Adam Simon from Private GP Extra, for giving your insights into the NHS, the mental health in the workplace, and giving us some very useful information. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you on a future podcast.
Thank you.